the engine had stopped, and there was I, suspended in the air, the dead pilot, Huns, bullets, wings, all around me. And I looked up to the heavens and I said, "Oh, God, help me."
I used to look up and see these machines flying all over the place, and moved further down south beyond Bethune and took over some French trenches. But we found them absolutely filthy, and we spent most of our time cleaning them out. And for the first time in my life, I found I was covered with lice. And it was then that really made me think that the trench warfare was not for me. And I used to look up with great envy at these aircraft flying around about. And so I immediately put in an application to join the Royal Flying Corps.
I knew it was no good trying to get onto a horse because horses were out. Then I thought I might try to be a gunner and get a seat on a limber or a horse that way. But they seemed to be full up, and I went round to the War Office where I was interviewed by a rather supercilious young man. And when I said I would like to fly, which I realized was something else I could do sitting down, not walking, he said, "So would 6,000 other people. Would you like to be 6,001 on the waiting list?"
I was a very slow pupil. I suppose I was a little bit dense or something like that, because I took 8 hours to go solo, whereas the average was about 3 hours. And I knew of one person who took only 20 minutes to go solo.
I certainly took to flying as a duck takes to water. I had no difficulty, or very little difficulty, in landing, which is 3/4 of the problem. I took to flying quite quickly, as I must have done so because my logbook shows that I had a total of 55 minutes dual control only before being allowed to go solo.
Well, after a number of hours of dual control, and when the instructor trusted you to fly the machine on your own with him sitting beside you, then was a time when he had to decide whether to let you go solo. And one began to realize that the time was coming. And when it actually arrived, of course, one felt nervous and rather strained, with butterflies in the tummy to a certain extent. At the same time, I felt perfectly confident I could do it. Otherwise, if I hadn't felt like that, he would never have let you go up. And I remember well that when I took off the ground and got into the air, I heaved a sigh of relief to think, well, I've done it. And it's not so bad after all.
When you went on reconnaissance, you had to watch for new trenches, new trains, or trains going in any direction, movement of artillery or movement of troops. And if you got back, when we went into the reports room and we got back, the joke was that we'd exchange what we'd seen. For instance, if I'd seen 3 trains and my friend had only got 1 train, I used to hand him 2 trains as well. And of course that meant that everybody had a decent report.
Taking the photographs, very pleasant job in the summertime, but in the winter, not very funny. Our camera gear was slung over the side of the aircraft. And to work your camera, it was a 1-plate camera, no repeats at all, 1-plate camera. You had to take your slide out of the box, your glove off, of course, get it into the camera, then wriggle your way through the Archie bursts over your target, take your photograph, away from the Archie bursts, I assure you, in the target, close up the plate, take the slide out of the camera, back into your box. And by that time your hand is so cold that over and over again have I known my hand lose the plate as I took it out of the camera. And I've known myself cry with numbness and pain in my hand and exasperation at losing repeated photographs that I've been trying to get. And I've known myself cry and the tears freeze on the side of my face in the cold blast off the propeller.
We met a German aeroplane at about the same altitude as ourselves and about the same speed, so that we couldn't get any closer than 600 yards. I put up my sights on the service rifle to 600 yards and fired 6 deliberate shots and was miserable that I didn't apparently hit him at all. I've no doubt I was miles away. We had no conception then at what close ranges it was necessary to shoot to have any effect at all.
Well, of course, it was bound to have a demoralising effect on us, and indeed it did so. And several squadrons got so badly shot up that the whole of their morale crumpled under the weight of this German armament. And as we were always sent over the other side of the lines to engage the German aircraft, it was even worse, because if you were engaged and shot down, you were shot down the other side of the line, and that's a thing that no pilot wanted at any time.
The SE-5 had 2 guns. It had a Lewis gun on the top plane with 100 rounds of ammunition in it on drums, and we carried spare drums in the cockpit. It had a Vickers gun which fired through the propeller by the Constantinesco gear, which was an oil-driven gear which stopped it firing the blades of the propeller off. Those guns could jam, and very often did jam. And when they jammed in the middle of the fight, a pilot was in a very precarious position, as you can understand. The unjamming of a gun when you're flying at 100 miles an hour plus, with icy hands at 15,000 feet, was a very difficult thing, because you had to put your hand out round the windscreen, round into the wind, and get hold of a handle on the gun and try and jerk it over in order to clear the belt, which was a collapsible belt which used to get jammed in the breech.
Now, a dogfight is rather an exciting game, actually. You dive onto the first Hun you come across. You open out your guns, although you may not have had time to get your gun sighted. And no sooner you've got your guns on him, someone else has got their guns on you. Now, you can't stand for that, because you know it's only a matter of a few rounds, and you might get your wing blown off. So you turn off, and you get him off. And then someone else joins in and helps you. And then you go for someone else. But it's continually turning and twisting. And directly, and although you're turning and twisting, you spot a black cross, and you make straight for it, and it's just a question of a mix-up until a matter of probably 5 or 10 minutes, when you think, well, it's about time we've finished now, because our ammunition's getting dry.
When we were within striking distance, we still had 300 feet in hand, and we went down on them straight away. I led our 6 camels straight in amongst them, singling out the leader for myself, and went for him with both my guns blazing. The other camels on either side of me each picked out one of the German aircraft. I dived down and shot that fellow and went on past him down below. Next instant I found an enemy aircraft on my tail, and I heard the machine guns rattling, and splinters were going off the rear spar of my camel just inches above my head. I saw the center section rip up, and I turned and swerved and got out of his line of fire and back into position, back into the fight. Within 2 minutes of the beginning of that fight, there wasn't an enemy machine to be seen in the sky anywhere.
The first thing was to sight the enemy before he sighted you, if you could, and maneuver yourself into a position above him and in the sun, if you could get into the sun. And then to dive at the highest possible speed, and each one single out an enemy aircraft and endeavour to shoot him down. It usually ended in getting into a tight spiral on the tail of the enemy aircraft, or on him on your tail if you were unlucky, and to endeavour to turn in a smaller circle than he could, which enabled you to stay on his tail and pour fire from your 2 Vickers machine guns into him wherever you could.
Of course, it was a great honor to be in the troop of Richthofen, and it was very interesting, the first air fight. We were on the French front in the near of Valenciennes, and we had air fights with French, Canadian and British Air Force. One day we were together with 6 pilots, and 4 of them shot down 10 French and English. And Richthofen alone shot of them 4 in one day.
He would lead them in, and if one of his flight was getting at a disadvantage with a Hun, heaven help that Hun, because he'd shoot it down. He had such a marvellous shooting power. I've seen McCudden shoot at targets. We'd all go up and we'd fire at the target, but McCudden would come down and he'd tear the target to shreds. And he had such a wonderful way of shooting. What it was, no one seemed to know. But he only had to fire a matter of 20 rounds and the machine seemed to fall to pieces.
They were shot down pretty freely. I didn't like this. So any fellow coming out new to my flight, as soon as he was ready to go over the lines, flew next to me. And outside him was the experienced man. And that was our diamond formation. So I look back on that time, but I never lost one of these boys who was new to the game. I kept my own eye on them, and other people did too. Of course, as soon as they became better acquainted to what was going on, they were on their own then. I don't mean to say that they didn't ever get shot down after that, because they may well have done. But not during that period. I never lost a new boy.
When we had passed the lines, we usually had to bomb villages or marshalling yards or roads. That was mostly when the German troops were attacking. So we tried to stop the reinforcement to arrive at the front for a few hours or a day or two. That was the idea. So, of course, we had to bomb railway stations. And unfortunately, when we had to bomb railway station, our bombing wasn't always accurate enough because our instruments were rather primitive. So I am sorry to say that sometimes we did hit some French houses and probably killed even civilians. That I don't know.
We were given an objective. We had to bomb it as accurately as we possibly could. We had to cross the lines, and when we were over the lines, of course, we were subject to enemy gunfire, anti-aircraft, and at the height that we flew in those days, which was not much over 2,000 to 3,000 feet, we were within machine gun range, and sometimes machine guns could be very troublesome. But we had definite objectives, and we had to get there, we had to bomb as accurately as we could, and we had to get back.
I felt the machine lurch. I turned my head over to my shoulder, and I saw that my pilot had slumped on the controls. And then there was a grasping sound. The engine had stopped, and there was I, suspended in the air, the dead pilot, Huns, bullets, wings all around me. And I looked up to the heavens, and I said, "Oh, God, help me." And the next thing I remember was having a sledgehammer blow on my head, and I put my hand to my helmet, and I found it all jagged and torn and a certain amount of blood. And then I had a blackout, and I fell through the air, I think, like a falling leaf or a wounded or injured bird. And I think it was the upward rush of the air that brought me to my senses. I had presence of mind to pull on the joystick to break the fall, and the machine staggered and stalled and fell on some trees.
I was ordered to destroy a bridge which was in front of the moving line. It was rather a fairly hopeless order because we had to fly without any fighter protection. I was caught by 5 Spats, very good single-seaters, flown both by the French and by the British. It was a very brisk and short encounter, and I was really a dead duck, because my machine was much less maneuverable, and my observer was soon put out of action by a shot through his chest.
I found it terribly difficult to sleep after this incident, getting hit like that. It certainly had a very marked effect, actually, because I found it very difficult to sleep at night. There was the shock of the thing and so on. And I never went to see the doctor until I eventually blacked out at 6,000 feet with 220-pound bombs under me. And I got such a fright. With an aeroplane, you were so sensitive to it that as soon as the nose dropped, when I sort of dozed off, whatever it was, I don't know, I blacked out. The nose dropped a bit and I came to, and I put the wind up me so much that I thought, heavens, as soon as I get back I must go and see the doctor and report to him. So I did, and he took me off flying, and that was the end of my First World War.
Well, I think it not only 40th Squadron, but every RFC squadron, the centre of the squadron seemed to be in the bar. That may offend a lot of people in these days, but it's perfectly true. And when you think of these boys, with the tensions they lived through the day, and they came in the evening, and their best friend, where's him? I miss old George. Oh, he bought it this afternoon. Oh, heavens. Now the gloom would come into a mess, the morale would die, and the reaction immediately was, well, come on, chaps, what are you going to have? And that is the sort of spirit that kept going. I still think that it played a magnificent part in keeping up the morale of our troops generally.
Well, they were just an ordinary overseas airfield. We had Nissen huts to sleep in. We had a Nissen hut for mess, and we had ordinary hangars, portable hangars for the aircraft. Nothing very spectacular. We used to have sleep two pilots to a hut. And it was a very mixed squadron. It included Americans, Canadians, New Zealanders, South Africans, one or two English, and an Irishman or two. So we were a very mixed crowd indeed, and a very, very happy lot. And every pilot in the squadron was right on their toes. The morale was very high indeed, and you felt that you joined something worth joining.
In the cold weather, because we had open cockpits, and you had a winter warmer. It was a little cylinder with felt round it, filled with a slow-burning, smouldering material, which you kept in your pocket. If your hand got very cold, you put your hand in your pocket, take your winter warmer out, have a little warm, pass it to the other one, have a little warm, and put it back again.
When we were flying about 17,000 feet, it gave you a wonderful feeling of exhilaration. You were sort of, I am the king of the castle. You were up there and you were right out of the war. And I'd been in the infantry in the Army Service Corps. In the infantry we were always lousy and filthy dirty and very often hungry, whereas in the Flying Corps it was a gentleman's life, because you sort of stepped in a bed, you put on pyjamas every night, you had a decent mess to come back to, and you had about 2.5 hours of patrol perhaps in the morning and 2.5 hours in the afternoon, and that was the job. So altogether it was much more pleasant.